Thank you very much. I'd like to particularly thank my fellow panellists on that initial panel, Jerome, Hope, and of course Damien, and Simon for doing such a cracking job of moderating. Hopefully that sort of set the scene a little bit for FIFA itself. We've now got what I think will be a cracking session. We've got 4 incredibly interesting people to talk specifically now about the World Cup bidding process. I'll introduce, no, I won't introduce, I think there's probably going to be a bit of voiceover will come along, but David Eads, my buddy, will come and talk you through.
Jamie, thank you very much. Very good to be with you all this morning. We're going to start essentially with what I would call a bit of TV theatre, really, for good cause, and I'll show you why in a second. But there's one story in the last few years which I think everyone in this room knows only too well, or at least certain aspects of it. Grigory Rodchenkov is a name which will be tied forever, I think, with one of the most, if not the most, explosive exposures of foul play in international sport. The former head of the Russian anti-doping laboratory, he was, ironically, responsible for developing and distributing a doping system which extended to thousands of Russian athletes, as we now know, not least also a cover-up system to go with it. He was the man who led Russia's doping program for 2012 and 2014 Olympic Games, so for London and Sochi. And he turned whistleblower in 2016. He fled to the United States in fear of his own life. He left behind his wife and family. And his evidence given to Professor Richard McLaren for the full investigation commissioned by WADA pointed to that doping cover-up for more than 1,000 Russian competitors in a whole variety of sports, of course, but interestingly, ultimately, we learned it included a number of Russian international footballers. In the final assessment, some 34 within potentially the cover-up phase of that operation. So let's just be clear before we meet Dr. Rodchenkov. The McLaren report itself certainly does not unequivocally praise him for blowing the whistle. It concludes, I just want to quote this, that he was an integral part of the conspiracy to extort money from athletes in order to cover up positive doping tests. It did go on to say, though, that whatever his motivation may be, whichever wrong he may have committed in the past, Dr. Rodchenkov was telling the truth when he provided explanations of this cover-up scheme that he managed. Well, we're 2 weeks away now from the first ball being kicked, as you know, in the 2018 FIFA World Cup finals in Russia. So inevitably, the question of Russian international footballers also comes into our purview here. And that is one of the reasons why we have invited Dr. Rodchenkov to join us. And I think we can bring him up via Skype now. And you see before you Dr. Rodchenkov. Grigory is, as many of you will know, in a witness protection situation in the US. So we don't actually know where he's sitting at the moment. It goes without saying, we can see he is masked up to hide his facial identity for now. And I should also say there are a couple of specific legal cases which are running through CAS. One concerning the Russian sports minister, Vitaly Mutko, another concerning 3 Russian biathletes, which of course mean there are certain areas in which we cannot go and will not discuss. This has been agreed with Dr. Rodchenkov's own legal team as well. I think it's important to make that point at the start. So, Dr. Rodchenkov, I just want to check, first of all, we can see you on the screen. Can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you very well. You do hear?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, there's maybe a tiny delay, but I think we can live with that. I think what we'd like to do first, Dr. Rodchenkov, is sort of get to the nitty-gritty, if you like, of the Russian football squad. As you know, the tournament kicks off in a couple of weeks, Russia versus Saudi Arabia. And I want to know what you could tell us in terms of that squad. And in particular, perhaps, of the 34 footballers who were listed in the doping cover-up program, the disappearing positives, as it's referred to. Can you make any connection between that 34 and the squads that is involved in the World Cup?
You see, 34 names which were discovered in McLaren education. They were all football, including junior, under 23, ladies team, and sometimes I did not put exact names because football historically was a privileged sport in Soviet Union in Russia, and many cases were just dropped without any investigation. The main concept was that Minister Mutko, Vitaly Mutko, who was my boss and also president of Russian Football Union, he told me that we don't need any positive cases or even any noise in football, especially, of course, in national level team. So 34 names, these are names of different players and of different levels of skills. Maybe there are some national team. I looked through the names of 23rd players which were enrolled in national team for Moscow, Russia FIFA Cup, and I recognize only one name we have problem with. The others are, especially compared to 2014 previous edition, are very much new for me. Maybe 62/3 of them are new.
From what I understood you saying there, and can I just check with our audience, are you able to hear clearly enough what is being said? It's a little bit of a struggle for us to pick up some of what you're saying, which is not your fault. I think it's the Skype link. Nonetheless, let me just clarify. You did suggest that there was one name that was familiar to you. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, out of 34. And the other 33, all completely new to you, or
sorry, I'm talking about 23 list of national team.
Okay.
And I recognized one name. Out of 34, which were submitted by McLaren and also to FIFA, and FIFA sent me questions, some of names were recognized only by code numbers of their sample, and they were not available even for me. This is the most important thing.
Okay, so, and I'm going to ask you just to lean forward a little bit, if you would, and we'll get perhaps a little bit, that might help, a bit closer to the microphone for the Skype link. So your day-to-day role in terms of the anti-doping operations with footballers in particular, with footballers, was what?
As a director of WADA accredited laboratory, I was supervised the whole process of doping control, especially quality control, especially samples which require special confirmatory procedure for quantifications. In regards to football, we have mandatory pre-departure testing of national teams of each level, girls, ladies, juniors, main national team, before each game, which was held especially abroad. Then we have testings at national level. It's a national championship football. And there are some specificity, especially for corticosteroid, because usually it was the main concern, corticosteroid used for trauma, healing, cure. And sometimes we had some cases, but again, there is a threshold compound you have to quantify. It might be marijuana, or it might be pseudoephedrine, and just usually we don't go into the depth for quantification and for reporting positive.
Okay, so given that you said that Mr. Mutko had pointed out to you specifically that footballers must be protected, or I think that was the expression you used there. Did you then have that hands-on role in working with the anti-doping regarding footballers? I'm just trying to get that clarity.
If I understand correctly, Mutko, as my boss and senior person boss in Russian football, told me, don't touch football players. If you have any problems, immediately report to me. No, usually I reported to my close boss. It was Vice Minister Yuri Nagornov, and Nagornov immediately reported to Mutko. And also it means that we did not proceed confirmation procedure.
So
everything was reported negative.
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify then, because I think the line is getting a little better, maybe our ears are tuning in a little bit more to the line. You recognised certainly one name from the list which figures in the squad of 23, which is representing Russia in the World Cup finals.
Yes, one name.
And only one?
Only one.
Okay, all right, I just want that to be absolutely clear so that we all know where we're coming from then. So let me just move along a little bit then in terms of the amount of inquiry that has come as a result of these findings. Obviously, the information was given to FIFA about the 34. I think it was given initially about the larger number in its entirety, but the 34 possibly implicated in the protection part of the doping system. You provided, first of all, what to FIFA? Did they approach you, or did you approach them? Have you spoken directly to FIFA?
There are three questions. For McLaren, for his disclosure package, I gave all materials, all file from my computer. There are also other sources of information. So actually, I don't have exact names of these 34 athletes, football players. Then FIFA started investigation. I never contacted FIFA people directly, but I received a list of questions and I answered this large list of questions. It was like 60 questions, and there are some reference to particular code numbers and some concentrations, some records. Especially important that now we have LIMS information, which you can refer to this particular sample. Both from Adams you have name and code number, and from hidden secret Russian LIMS you identify what was compound investigated and how positive was disappeared technically.
So you had 60 questions. Did you consider that a pretty comprehensive list of questions that you would need to be asked?
Yes, some questions were very much professional, and for me, it looked like some expert topic control field prepared and questions, wording, definitions. It was highly professional.
Okay, and so you replied to these 60 questions, presumably to each and every one of them?
Yes, I replied to all questions, but some of them were little new for me. I don't find detailed information in my computer to give more information, but I answered all.
So where you weren't able to give full information because you couldn't find it, what was the response from FIFA? Did they presumably come back to you wanting to know more?
Seemingly they were satisfied, and we don't have any follow-up question.
So what was your next communication, if you like, with FIFA?
Or it's not a question to me. I don't have any information. It was like a one-way road. I provided information and that's it.
Right, okay. I mean, as you well know, FIFA have said more than once actually, but if we go back to February, for example, I'm quoting here, a standard reanalysis of all suspicious football samples has already been conducted by the Lausanne laboratory and all results were negative. They've said again in the last week, there's no cause for concern. Your response?
I know Lausanne laboratory very well, and they are highly professional. And I don't have detailed information. Negative means negative. Meantime, sometimes negative samples, when we have more technology after years, may return positive. You know, reanalysis problem with samples from former Olympic Games. But Lausanne, they store all samples from FIFA Cup from previous edition in Brazil, and they know the priority list and they know the risk compounds. And if FIFA said it was clean, it means negative and clean. But I don't have detailed information. It's a testing authority, FIFA, and they don't disclose details what sort of analysis was done.
So it would only be an opinion, but let me ask you anyway, do you think there is a chance that this could be a clean World Cup in terms of doping, that it is a clean squad? Presumably not. It's
not easy question to answer because I am far from Russia and I have information from internet and other public domain mass media. I know that it will be only foreign doping control experts, doping control officers and chaperones. All Russian doping control personnel is not trusted and not allowed to participate. It should be clean in terms of this 1 month competition in Russia because there is a light spot and there are controls. And I know that for such major event, WADA has a special team of independent observers. You know, doping control, the main is that during competitions, all people are clean. The most complicated and wrong things are done out of competition, quite before major events. And in football is a very specific sport if you compare to athletics and skating or skiing or biathlon. They are spread out in their particular clubs for 11 months. And we don't know, at least I never know, what they were done and what was their proceed.
Right. One thing you do know, of course, if we associate this to other sports, other Olympic sports in particular, you would have a very good idea as to what proportion of the high-performing athletes in particular for each sports might expect to be benefiting from the cover-up system that you helped to put in place. I'm not asking for specific numbers, but I mean, is there a sort of a general ballpark percentage of how many athletes might have been protected in any given sport?
You know, I cannot say across all sport because some sports was even out of my scope, interest. I have no time. I have preparations to Sochi. I have very much exhausted with my everyday work. But what I was working closely with weightlifting and athletics, I can tell you that weightlifting is a 99.99% benefited from the doping control schemes. In athletics, again, we are talking about national team and top-level athletes. We don't cover even knowledge and bioanalysis, junior and young generation. But national team, it's 90%, 90.
Okay, so it goes from very high to presumably far lower. But what I suppose I'm getting at is, can you therefore extrapolate from that for us a little bit as to where the international football squad might fit in that frame?
When we are talking about weightlifting and athletics, there is a large gap, huge difference compared to football. There are most important doping substances were anabolizing agent. And for that time, you have to have special preparation training camps out of competition and especially to be hidden. In football situation is completely opposite. They are exposed to testing, or they coming for pre-competition training camps in Turkey, in Spain, in Cyprus, in Canarian Island, where they are exposed to doping control. They have no chance to pass complicated, sophisticated doping scheme. This is the most important thing for such sport. And on top of that, high-level football players, they have agent, they have a therapist, physio expert, or doctor, and I know that they try to keep him clean because they were afraid any doping case it will ruin the career of entourage of each particular player. In contrast to athletics, any positive case, entourage survive and they continue their bad work.
Okay, so in a sense, what it seems like you're saying is football, perhaps because of the money generated and for players, perhaps has a little more capacity, or individual players, to fight against the system, and yet nonetheless there are 34 names on the sheet for those who were helped in covering up one way or the other.
34 names, I repeat you again. There is no comparison between weightlifting and football and even athletics, how many people and football players are. Football, there are millions of football lovers and hundreds of thousands who are playing football. So the field is much more larger. And 34 names were consolidated over years across different teams. Junior, I told you so much. And very important, that such 34 names are still under investigation and maybe to be investigated because we did not proceed confirmation. We have initial testing procedure. If something was wrong, we reported to Nagorno and then to Mutko, and then procedure was stopped and reported negative. Especially in corticosteroids, we don't know exact concentration. It's only preliminary data. They were suspicious, but we cannot say yes or no, whether it was anti-doping rule violations. You have to understand difference between laboratory finding, it's an analytical adverse finding, and anti-doping rule violation, which constitute doping case. This is important.
Yeah, okay. I think we understand the essence of what you're saying there. Can I just take you back also onto one slightly different track, which is referring back to the build-up to the Sochi Winter Olympics in 2014, because in 2013, in late 2013, the laboratory was informed it was being suspended. WADA made that announcement, and obviously, if you were working up towards the Winter Olympics themselves, that suspension would be damaging, crippling even to the work you were doing up to the Olympics?
Now you are touching a very important question in my life. It was WADA investigation on Moscow laboratory, which started in October 2012 and last until March 2014, when independent commission finished, and the climax apex was held in Johannesburg during special disciplinary hearing under guidance the chairman of Dick Pound, together with Jonathan Taylor and Professor Larry Bowers. And there were very important, later it should be investigated, but all wrongdoings and departures from international standards for laboratory was investigated. And each situation may be considered from different sides. So WADA decided to suspend, since we don't go to conclusion, and disciplinary panel failed to answer 24 hours in Johannesburg, and it was lasted day by day. They decided to suspend Moscow laboratory for 6 months, but suspension will be postponed for 6 months until we prove that these particular departures from international standards and discrepancies are not influence the result in laboratory in Sochi Olympic Games. And then we have a special commission under Professor Bruno Bizek from Nantes. who said that there are numerous things to be improved, but general laboratory fits to purpose and could be participate and perform doping control during Sochi Games. Otherwise, immediate suspension of laboratory will be catastrophe for the whole national sport.
Right.
You are talking very important for me in my biography case.
Yeah, and of course, critically important for Russia and for the Olympic team. Let me just put this to you, if I can, Dr. Rodchenkov. Your evidence was explosive, to say the least. We know what happened. Russia has been suspended. Well, they were suspended, of course, from the Olympic Games. That suspension is over. The ban on Russian athletes, we've had 28 of 39 cases heard by CAS, has been overturned. You are facing lawsuits now from a number of Russian athletes for defamation as a result of your testimony. Where does that leave you?
Now we have also critical situation in the whole doping control process in the world. The shocking decision of arbitrage in February 1st, when 28 Russian athletes, they were not cleared. It was found that there is not damning evidence to disqualify them. And balance of probability was almost in favor of their wrongdoings, but it was not comfortable satisfaction of judges because they considered each case separately, not regarding to the whole system. And now we have not much information. We have written reasoned decision for Zubkov and Lekhkov. And paradox for me is that I swapped their urine in one day, but Zubkov is disqualified and Lekhkov is cleared.
Okay, but the situation as it is does suggest that your own credibility is on the line here.
My own credibility is always on the line, because what I'm saying, it's absolutely shocking. And it was a state program which were so much thoroughly deliberate that I, responsible for my particular part of work, did everything to destroy all evidence. This is the problem when we don't have evidence. I have no records. I cleared a lot of files. Now we have continuation of this procedure, especially defamation suit from oligarch Prokhorov defending Russian biathletes. You know, biathlon is one of the dirtiest sports in winter. It's like weightlifting in summer. And they were not included in this group of 39 athletes. Otherwise, balance of probability will be overturned into punishment of such athletes. And the main concept of Prokhorov is to threaten me. It's some sort of retaliation. But now we are working with a lawyer's team in terms of anti-slop concept to overturn claims against me and my credibility.
Right. Okay. Dr. Rodchenkov, thank you very much indeed. We're getting very tight on time. Don't disappear, but please, can we bring in your legal representative, Avni Patel, who I think is here as well. Yes, Ms. Patel, thanks very much for joining us as well. I just want to ask you this. We have this issue with CAS and making the point that evidence in itself does not amount to proof, and clearly they feel there's not necessarily enough evidence there. Dr. Rodchenkov is in the US and presumably wants to stay there, but I guess anything that chips away at his credibility is going to cast some doubt on whether the authorities in the US are prepared to let him stay.
So, David, I think that, Dr. Rodchenkov has proven to be credible and has been found credible by the IOC and various other platforms that he's provided information to. His ability to stay in the U.S. is something that, we are working to make sure that there is a way that he can stay here safely. Whether or not, he continues to participate is something that he's doing that compromises his own security, but is not directly correlated to his ability and our hopes for him to be able to stay safely in the U.S. and continue to work here and cooperate with those institutions.
Okay, that's the sort of process that we can understand. Give us a sense of your sense of his prospects.
So our hope for Dr. Rodchenkov, and I think that Grigory would agree, is that he has this canon of knowledge and expertise that can really contribute to the future of anti-doping regulations and creating a more robust system, not only for international sports, but also to further the mission of clean sports. So the hope is, and Dr. Rodchenkov has been working hard to create a syllabus and an education process and system for anti-doping officials and the next generation of anti-doping individuals around the country and around the world to be able to bring his skills through lectures and to a university. I think that's the hope.
Around the world, perhaps in sort of circumstances a bit like this one. Avni, thank you very much. Dr. Rodchenkov, one last thought for you. No one would doubt what you have gone through in terms of the last few years of your life. I think you've traveled a route from, if I can put it this way, a pretty nasty piece of work, to be honest, in terms of what you've been doing, what you were doing. Now you are someone determined to expose the truth about a corrupted system which you had driven. What is your motivation?
My motivation was simple. Even while I was doing such wrong things in Sochi and before Sochi many years, I started doping control work in 1985. I was absolutely sure that one day I will tell truth. Because it cannot be like this when you are saying that we are clean, that we are fight against doping, and the same way you support doping use at the highest scientific level and protection. And but I was obliged. I was director of laboratory, and being in Russia, I cannot tell truth. Otherwise, laboratory will be disqualified, and 50 people who depended on my operation will lose their job, their credits, family future. And when collapse happened, and after Dick Pound report in Geneva and in November, I luckily was suspended and then I resigned. I felt, and it was confirmed by top level people, a great threat for my life. And I immediately and still fled to United States. That's why I survived. And then I did understand that I must tell truth, but how to do that? But luckily, together with our team, we were preparing Icarus documentary. And while investigation go slowly but surely down into the depths, layer by layer, I disclose truth. And then we felt like a moral suasion to tell truth before Rio Games. And then it was a little bit messy, explosive, but it was my interview to New York Times in May 2016. Then it was done.
Right. Okay. Dr. Rodchenkov, our time is done too. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here in the conference. It's very much appreciated. Thank you too to Avni Patel and for giving us background and detail as well as to situations old and new in terms of your work, your laboratory findings and what you can add to the debate today as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Grigory Rodchenkov. I think we can all be very straight about this. The quality of sound that was a battle, and I think it's important we transcribe what we had there to see clearly, precisely what Grigory Rodchenkov had to say. Certainly he did say, and I'll just stress it, that there was one name currently within the Russian squad of 23, there was a name familiar from the list of 34 footballers in the cover-up list, if I can call it that, from his time working within the anti-doping laboratory. So that's the view there from Dr. Rodchenkov. It's a bizarre picture to deal with for 35 minutes, isn't it? But anyway, we've had that, and we're going to move this on now because we're going to move on to our panel, which looks at precisely the event we talked about there, the Russia 2018 World Cup, which is looming, but also Qatar 22, that whole bidding process. And just to sort of reset the scene, we're going to have a short video which will highlight the main issues of that, then I'll introduce the panel.